Hey, what's up guys? JB here, and this is part 3 of my Final Fantasy VI special collaboration series, featuring Celes Chere. Now in the game, Celes' story is one of tragedy and hope. Now as a young teenager, I'd say that Celes was probably my first video game waifu. I mean, how could your heart not melt during the iconic opera scene, or her melancholy in the world of ruin? But I digress, Celes is here, and in a surprise, she's coming a week early to Global, which kind of had me scrambling to make this video if I'm being honest. So much new content to cover this week, which is a good problem to have. So Celes is here as a 90 cost water unit, and she's the frontline presence that water has sorely been lacking pretty much since day one. So let's dive in and see what she actually brings to the table. And let's start with her TMR, and this one is Celes' uniform. And honestly, this one is a little bit disappointing. It's a near identical copy of Moore's TMR, just changing out silence and paralyze in lieu of the slow and sleep resistance on Moore's. They both protect against Berserk, which can be nice, but I think I actually like this one even a little bit less than Moore's TMR since it has less range on the buff, it generates less AP for you, and is also lacking that secondary faith effect on Moore's. So the TMR is definitely a little bit underwhelming, especially if you've already built up and have Moore's TMR. All right, so moving on to her stats, and immediately standing out here to me is that 67 agility, very high for a frontline unit, especially a tank. And she actually has even more base agility than King Mont. Having high agility on a tank can actually be pretty helpful to avoid getting double turned and taking chain damage on a tank, so definitely always welcome. Her HP and mitigation stats here are also a huge highlight for her. She has nearly 5,400 hit points, which would have her currently 4th overall in Global. She also has a very strong here 13 base spirit and positive resistances to all damage types other than strike. And that includes 10% to slash and pierce, and a quite nice 15% to both missile and magic. So incredibly balanced overall mitigation stat line here. In terms of her ailment resistances, nothing really incredible here I'd say, but I do like the immobilize resistance. As a frontline tank unit, being stuck in place and not being able to grab that aggro for your team can represent a big problem. And we do have a unit like Winter Luartha in the meta who has that very high chance to immobilize on her javelin. So definitely a pretty, decent resist to have. Her other 50% resistance would be to slow, which, another pretty decent one to have, but we don't often see this one in the PvP meta, at least right now. Looking at the negatives here, she is carrying a lower end magic total, so this is not really going to be a unit that you can rely on for any sort of big damage. She doesn't really carry any penetrations on her damage either, so I think also when you're considering evade units, her luck value is also very, very low at just 216, so she's not really going to have much chance to hit even moderately evadey units unless she's able to sort of reposition and get to the back or the side of that particular unit. Lastly, she's lacking any sort of base defense, so that could be potentially a pain point for her if she's taking heavy physical-based damage. She does have access, though, to some within her passives that we'll get into here shortly. But that's really all that I have here, not really a ton to nitpick in terms of Celes' stats. Very solid all around the board and great particularly in terms of the raw mitigation that she comes in with. In terms of building out Celes, the options, while good, are definitely more restrictive in terms of her role versatility. You essentially can only build upon her tankiness or her mobility with these options here. No options at all here in terms of ramping up her damage or accuracy whatsoever. Some highlights though here include this defense and spirit buff, which comes along with the innate hate. And that defense and spirit is going to put her at 12 base defense and 25 spirit, just right out of the box. So that's a good place to start. And importantly, that 5 hate that it comes along with can't be dispelled, which is another great thing to have on hand. Her HP up passive here does come along with a +1 move, so nice potential there to maybe have some separation and autoplay. And obviously when it comes to manual control, whether it's manual PvP or brutal type events, having that additional mobility is very, very key. I will say though that in an auto sense, having that additional movement can conflict with her trying to get multiple buffs on, before she engages with the enemy. So definitely something that you need to consider, when building out your team. She does actually have multiple buffs that she wants to get online that we'll look at, when we get into her skills. Now, another note here is that she does have double magic resist passives, and if she uses both, that would actually put her at 42% magic resist before we even get into gearing or buffs. So this is a great way to really shut down units like Halloween Little Leela or Marymore, who don't really have very much innate magic resist penetration. For counters, she gets Sword Guard, she gets Magic Guard, and she gets Magic Reflex. Now, Magic Reflex, as always, is a great one and normally one that I highly recommend. However, if you plan on using Celes' runic ability, there is actually a conflict between those two skills. She's just going to dodge that spell and runic is not going to go off. So any teammates who are exposed to that area damage, would in fact take the damage. So definitely important to keep in mind. And in that regard, I think I actually, for most circumstances, would be recommending Sword Guard here. However, if you were targeting, specifically magical-based units only, there's definitely a case to be made for Magic Guard there as well. All right, so let's look at Celes' main kit, and we'll start with the buffs and support that she has. And the first one here is a staple for, any tank now, when it comes to her hate generation. This one comes with a 25 single target resistance on top, which, is incredibly powerful, especially if you were to combo this with a vision card such as Winter Holiday Party. It's a great card that gives 20% area resist, so that would just give Celes even more layered general mitigation on top of all the great types mitigation that she already has innately. Her second skill here is Runic, and this one is a marquee skill, when it comes to Celes. And this one really mirrors her ability within Final Fantasy VI and within the general Final Fantasy universe at large. Amazing skill here that will essentially nullify 2 area effect magic-based skills and provide Celes AP and TP when it triggers. So this actually saves your entire team from taking any magical damage in that scenario whatsoever. So this is an immensely powerful skill, one that has the potential to completely shut down AoE magic threats, units like Halloween Leela, Moore, and Jaden, for example. Now, interestingly, this will not do anything to magical slashing damage coming in from like a unit like Elena, for example, whether it's area of effect or not. Although Celes, with her high base spirit and good general resistances, will still hold up to that kind of damage very, very well. 2 more interesting facts, though, on this skill. 1. The enemy does not consider the impact of Runic at all when it's doing its target and damage skill selection, and will often just fire AoEs away only to have them nulled. 2. There's no current way to actually dispel this status off of Celes, but there will be one coming in about 3 months or so, and it's actually on an MR unit that we get for free, so definitely keep a watch out for that one. Now, in terms of the AI and the interaction of how it uses these skills, I'm not 100% sure which one she'll use first, but ideally you'll want to have both of these buffs online. So in an auto scenario, you may need to do some tweaking in terms of her positioning and the skill on and offs to ensure that happens, especially on smaller maps. Now, last here, I have a highlight from her main job sub, and that's a Curata equivalent heal. Very nice utility here, especially from a manual perspective, if using Celes is more of like a support style unit. And it may be a reason to consider using this sub, although I think she has better options that we'll get into. Okay, so moving into Celes' attacks, and this first skill here is a low AP cost ability which provides a range 3 low damage attack, and it comes along with a 25% chance to sleep the target. Interesting applications here if you were able to land this. Any follow-up damage by your team will do 50% increased damage on the slept target. So it actually works very similar to Berserk in that way. Definitely an interesting interaction here that maybe not a lot of people will realize. Her next attack here is a range 2 medium damage 170 mod, but it does carry a 25 spirit break before the damage comes. And similarly, this next attack is a decreased area resist of 25, also coming in before the damage. So these 2 skills are very important. First, those breaks are delivered before the damage is hitting, meaning that their effect is getting applied whether that skill hits or not. So very good, if going up against evade units, for example. Especially as we noted in the base stats portion, Celes has very subpar accuracy. Second, these breaks offer a nice utility from Celes, in sort of being able to ramp up your team's damage output. You could imagine a follow-up hit from Summer Elsie, for example, using her Law of Geoabsorption, or maybe even a barrage from a unit like Lara Croft coming in after this area resist down is applied. Definitely a good way to sort of amp up their damage potential, so I definitely like these 2 attacks quite a bit. Her last attack here is actually another pretty interesting one. And this one, before the damage, it actually dispels any active debuffs that she's incurred. So things like maybe a slash or elemental imperil that's been landed on her, or maybe even a defense and spirit break. Those are all gone, whisked away. And within an auto environment, you may want to actually tweak some skills, perhaps even considering turning off that big AoE skill that we just talked about. And you might do that to ensure that she actually uses this skill consistently, like in the mid-fight. It definitely has the potential to be really annoying for opponents who are trying to burn Celes down by applying various debuffs to her. Alright, so last one here, and this is her limit break. And this is a range 3 with a +1 on the cross AoE with a standard 200% mod. And this one actually increases all of her damage resistances by 15%. Hugely powerful tank buff here, making her even that much harder to kill. And when Celes gets this and her other buffs online, she may very well be the best Omni tank that we've seen in the game in quite a while. Omni tank meaning being able to deal with any kind of damage threat that's coming her way, whether it be physical or magical or anything really. Now, if Celeste were hit with a Dispel or her Protect and Shell runs out during the mid-fight, that's definitely going to expose her and make her a lot more susceptible to especially physical damage. But that's really common for any tank out there nowadays. But this LB being that mid-fight buff definitely, I think, gives her a leg up on the competition. It helps her sustain and keep that mitigation going, throughout the course of the whole fight. So very nice for her here. All right, so moving into Celes' subjobs, and she actually gets 2 classic subjobs here in Spellblade and Red Mage. And both of these jobs have actually aged pretty well in the party utility that they bring along with them. Now, Spellblade, of course, gets Resist Magic, still a very, very powerful buff with that 38% magic resist to the party. Not quite as good as it once was, in the age of magical slashing, magical fisting, or even magical arrows. But where it's applicable, it's still incredibly strong. This is also her only party buff that she has, so could be a good way to sort of keep her back if you were wanting to draw the enemy in, like in an autoplay environment. She does also have access to Taunting Spell within this job, but probably not a skill that she would really use in auto unless you really turned a lot of other things off. Importantly though, she does get access to Magical Barrier, which is great obviously if you wanted to throw this on manually, but again, if we're in autoplay, you have to really think about all of the other nice buffs that she has access to and which exact ones you want to use and turn the appropriate ones off. Because she's definitely not going to have enough turns to use everything here. Right, so she does also have Red Mage here, and importantly that would give her access to Jamming Thrust, which would be her highest range skill at range 5. So it could be a consideration there. She does also get with that Chere and Esuna as well. So great for maybe more of a supportive role, Celes, for manual play or perhaps PvE brutal events. So really, I think either of these could be good options. It sort of depends on what you want to go for. Do you want more mitigation that the Spellblade gives you? Or maybe do you want more of that supportive aspect that would come with Red Mage? That's sort of the choice that you have to make. All right, so moving into an actual build here, and here's a mock water build that I've been playing around with in the JP Builder. Now, water does actually have a lot of great attackers, but sadly, actually a lot of them are limited, including these 2 that I have pictured here in Summer Elsie and Titus. But you could swap these units out, maybe you invested in the water missile units like Lara Croft and Winter Victoria, or maybe you don't have any of the limiteds, and in that case, maybe you could go for something from the permanent pool like Farm or More, and they could definitely be used to similar effect. I do like this particular party though, because what I've done here is I've sort of paired 2 more physical bruising type units in Titus and Summer Elsie, both of whom are carrying an innate weakness to magic, but are otherwise very solid against physical damage. And Celes is actually largely solving that issue of magic weakness for them and any sort of AoE magic damage that might be coming their way. Now, in terms of the actual build choices here, I am opting here for a more heavy accuracy build, and that's just to cover the lack of guaranteed hits that this party would have outside of Elsie's limit break. But I do sort of love this idea of Celeste being able to come in and solve or at least heavily mitigate the problem of this AoE magical based damage for a lot of units out there. And I'll absolutely be trying out a party like this once I do have Celes. Now, one other note here, in terms of Celes's vision cards, I have gone for more what would be considered physical based cards here, but that's because I'm really not caring about the actual damage that she's bringing to the party at all. So I have here the water attack card to buff up both Titus and Elsie, and then I have the Astrologer card to sort of give that attack up and acquired AP up for Titus. Alright, so here's the meta condition, and obviously we've looked at this for a lot of units lately, and Wind and Light are probably the top dogs when it comes to unrestricted PvP right now. Also in that conversation here is Lightning as well, which, obviously that's not great to hear for a water player, that your counter is actually one of the stronger elements out there right now. But I think at least in terms of competing against water and light, Celes instantly puts water in a very good position against those elements. As I referred to before, the main thing that water has really been lacking is that strong frontline presence. Now, they have all the other pieces that you need. They have great attackers, they have good support, but I think Celes actually flips the script in particular against a lot of these magical units that we've been seeing in the meta. Units like Marymore, Little Leela, and Jaden in particular. Now, Wind and Light have other nice options that they could play here. For Wind in particular, I think of a unit like Tifa here that you could pair with Winter Luartha, both of who would be able to do very nice damage against Celes, and obviously they don't have that magical component to worry about in her runic buff. Now, Light, on the other hand, everybody is getting Locke here, and he can set himself and Elena up to do great damage with his Slash Imperil. and obviously that amazing chaining potential that they have as well. It will be very hard for Celes to actually stand up to that kind of damage. Now lastly here, the elephant in the room, and that's the lightning element. Now obviously an elemental counter is very hard to overcome for any element in War of the Visions. But these three attackers that I have here listed next to Charlotte are actually all limited units. Now maybe you didn't play the game when they came out, or maybe you just haven't built them. Enter this unit here, and I know there's at least a few of you out there wondering who this unit is, and honestly that's cracking me up right now. And I get that, we never see this unit. She's pretty much been relegated to trash tier ever since the Lightning Selection Quest was released. But hear me out on this one. Velne has the Monk Subjob, and one of the best things about the Monk Subjob is the Store ability. The Store gives you a 150% buff to your attack for one turn, making your next attack incredibly strong. And Celes has that innate weakness to strike damage, as we saw in the stat overview. So take a look at this. Now, what we're seeing here is Velne capping damage on Celes, and she's doing that with a Surge Strike. Now, Surge Strike is actually a low 121% mod, so pretty crazy here. Now, obviously that was meme arena, and I get that, but even so, that's absolutely crazy. If you were worried about Celes and Astoria dominating the meta, I'm here to tell you, you don't really have to worry that much. This is a unit that you can work on right now. The selection quest is there, so that's my tip of the day for you. Okay, so you pulled Celes. First of all, congratulations on that. But what are the future considerations? First off, Chaos Odin. Probably coming, next week. A very powerful VC and Esper here. And interestingly, this is our first dual element vision card, giving full effect to both ice and water units. But the question is, at what cost? This is going to be Bahamut levels of crazy if they follow the JP banner. Let's hope that they don't and they throw us a little bit of a bone, because otherwise this card is only for the hoarders and whales out there. Everybody else, I would advise, wait for an off banner or some kind of deal on this, because you can absolutely make do without it, I promise you. All right, next card here is another permanent pool card that should be coming in or around the time of Astoria. So very, very nice water card with a full 25 party accuracy on it. And as we talked about earlier, water does not have a ton of guaranteed hits, among its roster. So I think this is actually a very, very strong addition for the water element. And then next we have Astoria. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of hype about this guy, and I think the legends are true in this case. He's going to be great, but like all great and balanced units, he does have counters. And Resnick and Queen, who I have pictured here, will be able to support the existing lightning options very well in doing that. And I did make a preview video specifically on these two that I'll link above, so please check that out if you haven't already. And my last note here, as we've talked about, ongoing in this collab series, is the impending global festival unit. What are they actually going to do? There's so many possibilities. Will it actually be a water unit to maybe put a firm stamp and finally cement a true water meta? I, for one, would be down for that, because we haven't really had a true water meta ever in the game, so that would be pretty fun to see, I think. So what's the final verdict on Celes? This is an absolutely stellar tank unit, one with high omni-tanking potential, not only for the water element, but for any element really. And I think that she could be used in many rainbow teams out there. She brings that unique runic mechanic, making FFBE cover-style tanking a reality in War of the Visions for the first time. She has a nice utility and support aspect to her as well, with several nice buffs and debuffs that she brings on top of it. Water also is an element on a bit of an upswing right now, with the Water Warrior, the crystal, soon to be released in about 5 to 6 weeks. On the other hand, Celes is a unit really lacking when it comes to offensive potential, particularly if you're going up against any sort of evade units. And while, as we said, water is on a little bit of an upswing, so is lightning. And lightning even more so, as we'll begin to see in the coming months. So definitely all things to keep in mind, but at the end of the day, Celes is the frontline tank that Water has been hoping for. So if you're a Water player, or even a player looking for a Water unit to build around for the future, I can't recommend Celes enough. That unique runic ability that she brings could almost be reason to pull on its own. Alright, so that's Celes, and sadly my Final Fantasy VI collaboration series is now coming to an end. Now, as I said at the beginning, this is up there among my top games of all time, so this is a huge nostalgia trip for me, and I'll absolutely be pulling for Celes as well. I've been waiting and saving up for this event, so I'm definitely ready. Now, I do plan to stream these pulls, so if you're interested in seeing that, definitely follow me on Twitch, jbenson79, come wish me luck. I'll probably be doing that tomorrow morning. So it could either be happening or maybe even over by the time you see this. Kind of funny to think about that, but definitely come check it out if you can. But in any event, what are your plans out there? Are you going for Celes or are you still in save mode? Is Final Fantasy VI a personal favorite for you? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.